All right, everybody. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at First Thessalonians. Buckle up, because we're going to be trying to squeeze this whole book into just a few minutes. You know how it is.
You got it. A whirlwind tour of First Thessalonians.
This was actually a listener request. Someone wanted us to do a deep dive on First Thessalonians, so here we go.
Yeah.
So First Thessalonians. This is a letter from Paul, one of his letters, to the church in Thessalonica.
Thessalonica.
Yeah. Now, this is one of Paul's
Very letters.
early letters, which I think is an interesting, very early.
Yeah, it gives us a really interesting glimpse into the early church and some of the challenges they faced.
Challenges? What kind of challenges are we talking about here?
They were dealing with persecution. A lot of these early Christian communities were facing pretty significant persecution from the outside. And then on top of that, you have this kind of looming question of the end times. They were really wrestling with, when is Christ going to come back? What's that going to look like? And so you have this kind of mix of immediate suffering and hardship, and also this future anticipation of what's going to happen.
Oh, wow. So like a lot of pressure, basically. Trying to live as a Christian while also expecting the world to possibly end pretty soon.
Exactly. A lot of uncertainty in the air. So into that context, Paul writes this letter, and it's really fascinating because it's a mix of encouragement and also instruction.
Interesting.
So he wants to commend them for their faith. He wants to build them up, give them hope, but he also wants to correct some misunderstandings and give them practical guidance on how to live their lives.
That's interesting. So he's both like a cheerleader and a coach, kind of like a mentor figure.
Yeah.
What are some of the key messages that he kind of focuses on? Like, what are the main takeaways that we get from this letter?
So there are a few things that really stand out. First of all, he emphasizes love a lot.
Love.
Especially love for one another within the Christian community. Then you have holiness, which is really about living a life that's set apart for God. And that ties into this idea of living in light of Christ's return.
Okay.
And then the third thing is work.
Oh, interesting. So it's not all just faith and spirituality.
Mhm.
He also talks about practical things like working.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes First Thessalonians so interesting, is that it's very grounded. He's talking to real people with real problems. He even says at one point, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat.
Wow. That's pretty direct.
It is.
Yeah.
And it shows that Paul was concerned not just with their spiritual well-being, but also with their daily lives.
So he was a very practical person.
Very practical. He wanted to equip them to live well in the world, even while waiting for the return of Christ.
That's a great point. I think sometimes people can get so caught up in end times prophecies and predictions that they kind of forget about the present moment.
Right. It's easy to get lost in what might happen and lose sight of what's happening right now.
Exactly. So what would you say is the kind of overall tone of the letter? Is it like doom and gloom because of the end time stuff, or is it more hopeful?
No, it's surprisingly hopeful, and I think that's because Paul really emphasizes the fact that Christians have this incredible hope in Christ's return.
Okay. So the end times are actually a source of hope, not something to be scared of.
Right. It's not about fear or anxiety, but it's about anticipation and joy. It's about knowing that even though we face trials and difficulties in this life, there's something much greater to come.
I like that. It's a good reminder. So how do you think this message, this whole idea of living with hope and purpose, how does that resonate with people today?
I think it's still incredibly relevant. We still live in a world with a lot of uncertainty. We face our own unique challenges and anxieties. And I think Paul's letter can offer us a lot of comfort and guidance.
Definitely. I mean, just thinking about all the stuff happening in the world right now with politics and climate change and all that, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
Absolutely. But Paul reminds us that even in the midst of chaos and suffering, we can find strength and purpose in our faith. We can live with integrity, love one another, and work towards making the world a better place.
That's powerful. And I think it's a good reminder that faith isn't just about believing in something, but it's about putting that belief into action.
Exactly. It's about living a life that reflects our convictions.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into First Thessalonians, I'm left wondering, if Paul were writing to a community today, what issues do you think he would address? What would his message be for us in the 21st century? I think that's something worth pondering. We could probably do a whole other deep dive just on that question. But for now, I think we've covered a lot of ground. And remember, this was just a quick overview of First Thessalonians. There's so much more to explore in this letter. If you're intrigued, definitely go check it out for yourself. It's worth the read. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.